If you enjoy these videos, please hit the like button so I know I should keep creating them, and subscribe so you never miss a new one. I really appreciate it. Water bath canning is a very safe method of food preservation if it is practiced properly. Okay, the canning process heats food to a temperature that destroys microorganisms that could be a health hazard, or the microorganisms or enzymes that can cause food to spoil. So during this heating process, air is driven from that jar, and then as it cools, it forms a vacuum seal. So essentially, with all canning, what we're doing is removing the oxygen, we're destroying enzymes, we are preventing the growth of the undesirables, and we are forming a good vacuum seal to prevent any of the undesirables from getting back in again. Now, I'm not going to talk any specific canning recipes. We're just going to talk about the basic necessities that you need to get started. The equipment that you need for this is very basic and very simple. Of course, just like anything else, there are always all kinds of fancy things that you can go out and buy to either make it more fun or make it easier or whatever. But we're just going to talk the bare bones of what you need, and it's not as much as you might think. The first thing, obviously, is a pot that is deep enough to hold either the pint or the quart-sized jars, and one with a lid, okay? I started with a 16-quart stock pot, and it was more of a stovepipe shape, so it was a little bit more narrow, but it was very deep. And that was enough to work with in the beginning. It was a ceramic-coated one. There are water bath canners, specifically pots that are designed for this purpose, which I did switch to later on. And the reason for this is because of the second piece of pretty much required equipment, and that is a jar rack. I didn't have a jar rack when I was using that stock pot. When I did get a jar rack, it did not fit that stock pot. The jar rack is designed to hold the jars in place in the rack, elevated up above the base of the pot so they're not bouncing around and getting a chance to crack, and they're not banging against each other. I didn't have that jar rack. I was layering towels in the bottom of that stock pot to keep them from bouncing around, which did the job. But there was always a kind of worry that they were going to bang together. And also with that stock pot, because it was very deep but also narrow, I could not fit as many jars inside. So if you have the ability to get an actual canner with the jar rack, then I would recommend that. But if you're just starting out and trying to test the waters to see whether or not this is really something you want to get into, then a stock pot that's deep enough to hold your jars and a bunch of layered towels on the bottom is going to do the trick. Just make sure that you have them spaced apart from each other so they're not banging around. The third thing that I would absolutely recommend having is a jar lifter. This is like a special set of tongs that has a little curved section at the end of the tongs that is designed to fit snugly around the top of the jars, around the neck. I also did not buy one of these when I first started canning, and I should have. Again, we were on a really tight budget, okay, like a zero, not even shoestring budget. And I was just using a regular pair of tongs. First a metal pair, and then one that had like a silicone end to them. And let's just say the number of times that I either almost dropped the jar completely, either putting it into the water or pulling it out, or splashed myself and burned myself with the boiling water because I wasn't using the proper lifter. Yeah, too many to count. So if you can get the jar lifter, I absolutely recommend it. Don't, chance burning yourself or breaking a jar open. And then another thing that's not necessary, but is really recommended that I did end up buying fairly quickly after I started this is a home canning funnel. It is wider mouthed than like a regular funnel would be, and it makes it really easy to put items into the jars without spilling them all over the place. It just pops right into the top. I actually use this weekly, not because I'm canning, but because I'm putting things into mason jars, and it just makes it so much easier without things falling all over the place. So it's not expensive. I would absolutely recommend picking this up if you use mason jars for anything, but specifically if you're going to be canning. And then one thing that is a sort of nice to have, but that I still don't actually use, is there's a special tool for getting the bubbles out of the jars that also has measuring marks on it so you can measure your headspace. So these are two things that you will come to know are important to do. Number one is to remove the bubbles out of the jars before you put the lid on them to put them in the water. And the other thing is to measure the headspace, because every recipe is going to tell you that you need the amount of distance that you need to have between the top of the product that you are canning and the top of the jar. It could be a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, it could be a full inch. This is to help facilitate the ability to form a proper a seal, a proper vacuum, right? I still don't have this tool. I don't really need it. I just use a small, skinny silicone spatula as a way to get the bubbles out, and then I just use a ruler. I always have a ruler in my kitchen anyway, so I just pull it out and measure the headspace. And over the years, I've gotten really good at just eyeballing it, and I don't even have to use that anymore. But a lot of the times, you can buy a kit that comes with the canner and the jar rack and the lifter and the funnel, and it will include this tool. So heck, you might as well, right? And then, of course, finally, you need to have jars and lids. Now, you want jars that are specific to canning. Do not use like leftover pickle jars or leftover pasta jars or, whatever, and the lids that go with that for canning your home goods. You need jars that are specifically tempered to withstand the heat from canning, whether that is boiling water or pressure canning. If it's a canning jar, it can handle both. And then you also want the 2-piece lids with rings. And so when you buy these, you will see the lids are flat. That's the flat piece that has the rubber gasket that goes around on the top of the jar. And then there is a ring that goes along with it that allows you to hold that lid in place while the canning is happening. Once it's done, that lid isn't going to move anywhere because it's vacuum sealed in place. So that that ring is really only needed for the beginning part of the process when you're lowering the jars into whatever canner it is that you're using. You should not reuse these lids. These lids are actually intended to be one-time use only, and so you have no idea whether or not it's actually going to get the proper seal the second time. There are reusable lids. I think they're glass, actually, and they are very expensive. So if you're not sure whether or not you're going to continue with this whole canning thing, I would definitely recommend just getting the inexpensive 2-piece lids with the rings. And then later on down the road, if you decide that you want to invest in something like reusable lids, that is fine. So that's it. That is all that you need for your basic water bath canning. For more information about today's topic and to find all the ways you can get in touch with me or support the show, go to justgrowsomethingpodcast.com. Until next time, my gardening friends, keep learning and keep growing.